Hi there and welcome back. Today we'll be talking about the introduction to Volume B of our Norton Anthology, and that is American literature in the period 1820, that's post-revolution, beginning of the 19th century or so, um, all the way to 1865. Now, what you may have noticed is that these anthologies kind of break themselves off into the next one at wars or major conflicts. And we could talk about that a lot as to why that would be an appropriate way to do that and what that might say about American culture in general. But, with large scale national conflicts or international conflicts, you do often see dramatic economic and cultural shifts that do affect cultural artifacts of their time. In our case, we're looking at the written word, but you could say they also affect things such as art, sculpture, architecture, and in later years, of course, visual media, audio media as well. So we talk about, in some cases, the introduction of an American Renaissance. And there was an important American literature scholar who wrote this in 1941. And we've got to remember, we're getting close to that being almost 100 years ago. We're at about 80 years ago right now. But what he does is he assembles the idea of five writers that really produce a new kind of American literature, something distinctly different from what came before it, and also that was hugely influential what came after it. Emerson, which we'll be talking about probably one or two videos down the road. Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of the best early American dark romanticists or Gothic writers, if you want to call them that. Herman Melville, with Moby Dick, of course. Henry David Thoreau, and many of his important transcendentalist works, and also Walt Whitman. And you will see this transcendentalist line kind of weave through these different authors in different ways. Now, you got to remember this list was written in 1940, and it does look very kind of traditionalist in comparison to how we might build it now. So I think there probably is an argument to be made for updating this list. But you'll probably notice that as diverse as the Norton anthologies are, it's still a fairly traditionalist anthology in some ways. Um, I don't think there are any editors that are west of Chicago, in other words. So in other words, anything that happens, a literary scholarship, on the coast or past Chicago, isn't represented in their editorship. So I think that's something to keep in mind. If I were to rebuild this list off the bat, I would. I don't think you can make this list without having Emily Dickinson in there. And if we're talking about, just broad influence, I think she needs to be on there too. So there's a certain literary nationalism that happens in the 1820s. And part of this is post-war of 1812 and how that really changes how these new Americans, these young nationalists, feel about their nation and what it means to be an American. The War of 1812 is a really important part of this literary history. Remember, this is when the British Empire kind of like bites back, snips back at America, and there are conflicts at sea, but also on land. British troops burn the Capitol and the White House. That's a pretty amazing event if you think about it. But yet the Union survives it. But that's going to put Americans into a huge freakout mode. Their capital and the head of their executive branch of government has been burnt to the ground. That really throws Americans as a unit into a kind of existential crisis. What does it mean to be America? Are we going to make it? We're talking only 50 years, less than 50 years since the American Revolution. So a lot of people are still trying to figure out what does it mean to be an American and not a colonial, and not a British colonial subject. Here's another thing that's really important about the War of 1812. Andrew Jackson um, pulls off this amazing victory at the Battle of New Orleans. If you ever get a chance to go to New Orleans, do it. The food is amazing, music is amazing. But go and visit the monument at least, if not the battlegrounds of the Battle of New Orleans. Really, really a fascinating point in American history. He takes whatever people he can find to build the American army to beat the British. Instead of having those well-trained, well uniformed British soldiers marching along all properly and firing their rifles, Andrew Jackson's kind of got, I mean, if you understand the Star Wars analogy, they're kind of like the Rebel Alliance in a way. There's a bunch of ragtag people from all over the place. Furrers, trappers, merchants, street kids, anybody he could find. And, and instead of doing the proper imperial kind of military engagement, they use every tool they have against them. In some ways, it's kind of a precursor of guerrilla warfare. They didn't stand out in the open. They took shots from cover. They used very unorthodox tactics that, made some people in Britain, question their honor. But hey, um, they won the war. I mean, in a way, America becomes this innovator in warfare. Now that's a real mixed bag that I can't even get into right now. Now, Andrew Jackson gets fashioned on the national stage as a Republican hero. And now, Republican doesn't mean a member of the Republican Party as we know it today. That party does not come into existence until 1854. What we see again instead is that a Republican hero is a hero that believes in the republic form of government. In other words, a representative democracy where people vote for people to represent them um, in legislative creation of laws, like we do through our Congress. Um, it's a republic as opposed to a direct democracy. So, like this quote says, the republic hero is an anti-aristocratic, anti-monarchical person who comes from nowhere. He doesn't have land. He doesn't have a noble name, but through sheer virtue of strength, intelligence, and resourcefulness, um, rises to prominence and does great things. And this is so important to the American mythology, that we have this kind of thing, that we have this kind of person doing these things. And to follow up with that point, it is about Jackson representing the potential of ordinary people. You know, Anybody from any background can rise to prominence through their intelligence and their gifts. And another couple of important points about American literary history, and this rising sense of a national literature, is that there's huge pushback and huge snobbery against Americans and their culture during this time period. Sydney Smith of the Edinburgh Review, which is a British literary review, says this: in the four quarters of the globe, who reads an American book? So there is this snobbiness in place. But at the same time, Solomon Brown writes that the proudest freedom to which a nation can aspire is to found in complete emancipation from literary thraldom. Thrall means imprisonment or servitude. So think about it as Brown basically saying that to create one's own culture and to not just consume others' cultures um, is one of the most important senses of freedom that a culture can have, that a nation can have. And I think this also works on an individual basis too. We spend so much time consuming culture that has been made by other people, often by massive corporations in distant cities. Yeah, that's fine. Some of that stuff is amazing. But I think it's also important for us to consume and participate in local culture. Instead of watching, something professional, that we go see a play that happens at the college or at a local playhouse, that we do our own writing and we do our own visual art as well, because there is something involved in the creative process, whether you're an expert or just a novice, that is so much more gratifying than just watching other people do it. Um, really broadens your sense of the world. Now, one of the things that becomes central to this idea of um, literary nationalism in America in the 1820s is the subject of nature. And with nature comes, sorry, a little uncomfortable there, comes the notion of the American landscape. In other words, that there is something in the American land, its shape and its form, that really helps to inspire Americans in a way that the land and landscape may not in other places. And you can see other investments in this kind of thematic thread as well. I mean, built into that is the idea of the frontier as a place where one can always go and do something different and have more independence and make their own choices and be their own boss, uh, be an entrepreneur in a way. Painter named Asher Brand Durant, and it's called Kindred Spirits. You've got these two Americans who are of similar, how can I put it, are of similar temperaments and of similar value systems, uh, having a sense of camaraderie, but also being joined through this third term or this third element, which is the American landscape, American nature. And a lot of writers and cultural authorities of the day talk about the American land as being a crucial element, a third element in the relationship between one American and another, a kind of triple three-way. You can erase that part. A triangulation, let's call it that, of Americans with nature, with the landscape. Let's edit that one out. And here's another example of that landscape. And part of that relationship with the American land and with the American landscape, of course, comes from Native Americans. And Thomas Cole has a painting here called "Scene from the Last of the Mohicans" and that, of course, is the very famous novel by James Fenimore Cooper. But if you think about it, we've already got American culture commenting upon and reacting to or being in conversation with other elements of American culture. So you've got a painting, an American painting about an American book. But even before that is the subject matter of Native Americans and their relationship to land. And that is also going to be a growing theme as we move closer to the present in this course. Um, the indigenous people of North America and their relationship to land, and how that is inflected through American ideology, um, other American myths, such as the myth of the frontier, and also the myth of manifest destiny.